The laughter cut through me like a knife. My sister Phoebe stood in the middle of our parents' living room, gesturing wildly as she described my apartment to her friends. "You should see this place," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "It's literally a shoebox. I'm not even kidding. You could probably touch both walls if you stretched your arms out." Her friends giggled, and I felt my face burn with shame. I had made the mistake of mentioning that I was happy with my small studio apartment downtown. Big mistake. "It's so pathetic," Phoebe continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Like, how can anyone live like that? It's embarrassing. I would die if I had to bring a date there." My parents sat on their couch, watching the show but saying nothing. Mom looked uncomfortable, but she didn't speak up. Dad just stared at his phone. "The bathroom is so tiny, you probably have to step outside just to change your mind," Phoebe said, causing another round of laughter. I stood there, frozen, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. This was supposed to be a family dinner, but somehow it had turned into a roast session with me as the main course. I wanted to disappear. If you're watching this, subscribe, like and let me know where you're watching from. Meanwhile, Phoebe said, flipping her perfectly styled hair, "Vance and I just got approved for that luxury condo downtown. You know, the one with the rooftop pool and the concierge?" Her friends oohed and awed appropriately. Vance, her fiancé, smiled proudly and wrapped his arm around her waist. "It has floor-to-ceiling windows and granite countertops," she continued. "The master bedroom alone is probably bigger than Matt's entire apartment." I tried to smile and nod, but it felt like my face was made of plastic. Everything about Phoebe screamed success. Her designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, her confident way of talking about money like it was no big deal. "Show them the pictures, babe," Vance said, pulling out his phone. Phoebe eagerly scrolled through photos of their future home while everyone gathered around to admire it. The place looked amazing, I had to admit. All glass and steel and modern furniture that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. "This is what happens when you actually apply yourself," Phoebe said, shooting me a meaningful look. "When you set real goals instead of just settling for whatever life throws at you." The words hit harder than a punch to the gut. I looked toward my parents, hoping for some kind of defense or at least a change of subject. Mom caught my eye for a second, and I saw a flicker of sympathy there. But then she looked away and said nothing. Dad was still absorbed in his phone, acting like the whole conversation wasn't happening right in front of him. "Don't you think so, Mr. and Mrs. Hasman?" one of Phoebe's friends asked. "About setting high standards for yourself?" Mom finally spoke up, but not in the way I hoped. "Well, Phoebe has always been very driven," she said carefully. "We're proud of what she's accomplished. And Matt's still figuring things out," Dad added without looking up. "Not everyone moves at the same pace." The words were meant to be kind, I think, but they felt like another slap. Still figuring things out. Like I was some confused teenager instead of a 26-year-old man trying to build a life. Phoebe smirked. "Some people are just more ambitious than others," she said with a shrug. "There's nothing wrong with being content with less. Not everyone can handle pressure." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all about the long hours I worked, about the business idea I'd been developing in secret. But the words stuck in my throat. That night, alone in my small apartment, I finally let it all out. I paced the tiny space, my hands shaking with rage and humiliation. "Content with less," I muttered, repeating Phoebe's words. "Not everyone can handle pressure." I looked around at my modest home. Sure, it wasn't much. The kit layer was basically a corner with a mini fridge and a hot plate. The bathroom was so small I had to sit sideways on the toilet. My bed folded down from the wall. But it was mine. I worked hard to afford it, even if it wasn't impressive by anyone else's standards. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing. All the hurt, all the anger, all the shame from tonight poured out onto the pages. But somewhere in that flood of emotion, something else emerged. Determination. She thinks I'll never amount to anything, I wrote. She thinks I'm weak, that I can't handle pressure. She wants to keep me small, keep me in this box she's put me in. I paused, pen hovering over the paper. But what if she's wrong? What if I could prove her wrong? For the first time all evening, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I had a goal now. A real goal that went beyond just surviving day to day. What Phoebe didn't know was that I had been working on something. For the past 8 months, I'd been developing an app in my spare time. Nothing fancy, just a simple tool that helped small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. I'd taught myself coding through online tutorials, spending every evening and weekend hunched over my laptop. While other people my age were out at bars or binge-watching shows, I was debugging code and researching market opportunities. The app wasn't ready yet, but I'd already had 3 local businesses agree to test it once I worked out the final bugs. They seemed genuinely excited about what it could do for them. But I hadn't told anyone in my family about it. Not after what happened 2 years ago when I mentioned wanting to start my own business. Phoebe had laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine. "You? An entrepreneur?" she'd said. "Matt, you can barely keep a houseplant alive. How are you going to run a company?" So this time, I decided to stay quiet until I had something real to show. No more dreams and possibilities that could be mocked. Only results. The rejection from tonight's dinner made me more determined than ever. I would prove them all wrong, but I'd do it the right way. 2 months later, at another family gathering, Phoebe was back to her old tricks. This time it was my cousin's birthday party, and she had a fresh audience. "You know what Matt told me last week," she announced during dinner. "He said he's happy with his little apartment because it's cozy." Cozy. That's what people say when they can't afford anything better. The table went quiet. I felt all eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react. "There's nothing wrong with being realistic about your limitations," Phoebe continued. "But let's call it what it is. You'll never own property in this city, Matt. The market is way too expensive for someone in your situation. You should just accept that you'll always be small." The words hit like a physical blow. Always be small. She said it so casually, like it was an established fact that everyone should just accept. "Maybe you should look into some of those tiny house communities," she added with fake concern. "I saw a documentary about people who live in converted shipping containers. That might be more your speed." Her friends snickered, and even some of my relatives looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I gripped my fork tighter and forced myself to smile. "Thanks for the advice," I managed to say. But inside, something hardened. Later that evening, while Phoebe was holding court in the living room, I found myself on the back porch with Vance. He seemed different when he wasn't performing for an audience. "Nice night," he said, looking up at the stars. "Yeah," I replied, still stinging from dinner. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Vance spoke again. "You know, sometimes I wonder if all this property stuff is worth the stress," he said quietly. I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The mortgage payments, the insurance, the maintenance costs," he said, running a hand through his hair. "People see the glamorous side, but they don't see the monthly panic attacks when you realize how much money you're spending." He glanced back toward the house where Phoebe's laughter could be heard. "Don't get me wrong, I love Phoebe," he continued. "But sometimes I miss the simplicity of renting. When something broke, you just called the landlord. Now every problem is our problem, and they're all expensive." I processed this information carefully. So the perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. "Still," Vance added quickly, "it's what she wants, you know? And I want to make her happy." Something in his tone suggested that making Phoebe happy was becoming more complicated than he'd expected. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work with an intensity that surprised even me. Every rejection, every mocking comment from Phoebe became fuel for the fire burning inside me. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to code before my day job. During lunch breaks, I'd call potential clients or research competitors. After work, while my coworkers headed home to relax, I'd grab coffee and code until midnight. My small apartment became command central. I covered one wall with whiteboards tracking my progress. User testing results, revenue projections, feature requests, everything mapped out in colored markers. I lived on cheap pasta and canned soup, funneling every extra dollar into my business. While Phoebe posted Instagram photos of expensive restaurants and shopping trips, I was learning about LLC formations and software licensing agreements. The isolation was hard sometimes. I turned down invitations to hang out with friends, canceled dates, skipped family events when I could get away with it. But every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember Phoebe's words, "You'll always be small." Not if I could help it. My app was getting better every week. The beta testers were giving great feedback, and word was starting to spread. Other businesses were reaching out, asking when they could get access. I was building something real. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code, when my phone rang. "Is this Matt Hasman?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Matt. My name is Tom Romano. I own Romano's Restaurant Supply downtown. I heard about your inventory app from Bill at Miller's Hardware. He says it's completely revolutionized how he manages his stock." My heart started racing. Bill Miller was one of my beta testers, and apparently he'd been talking. "I'd like to schedule a demo," Tom continued. "And if it's as good as Bill says, I want to sign up immediately. I've been losing money for years because I can't keep track of what I have and what I need." We scheduled a meeting for Friday. When I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a full minute. This was it. My first real client. Someone willing to pay actual money for something I'd built. I called in sick to work that day and spent every waking hour polishing the app until it was perfect. The demo went flawlessly, and Tom signed a 6-month contract on the spot. "This is exactly what I needed," he said, shaking my hand. "How soon can you have 5 more of my restaurant owner friends try this out?" 10. Meanwhile, Phoebe's perfect image was starting to show some cracks, though only I seemed to notice. At Thanksgiving dinner, she snapped at Vance when he suggested they might want to save money by cooking at home more often. "Image is everything in my business," she hissed under her breath, not realizing I was close enough to hear. "We can't look cheap." Later, I overheard her on the phone in the bathroom, arguing with someone about credit card payments. "I told you the money would be there by the 15th, she was saying, her voice tight with stress. "Yes, I understand there are late fees, but this is temporary." When she came back to the table, her smile was back in place, but I caught the worried glance she shot at Vance. The expensive lifestyle was taking its toll, but she was determined to keep up appearances. She posted photos of new purchases constantly, designer shoes, expensive jewelry, fancy dinners. But I was starting to wonder if she could actually afford any of it. Still, the family treated her like their golden child. Every new purchase was celebrated, every achievement praised to the sky. When I mentioned that my work was going well, Mom just nodded politely and changed the subject. The double standard was glaring, but I kept my mouth shut. Soon enough, things would change. By December, word about my app was spreading faster than I could keep up with. I had 15 paying clients and a waiting list of 30 more businesses that wanted in. I quit my day job and hired my first employee, a part-time customer service rep to handle the growing volume of support requests. The money was starting to add up. Not enough to buy a luxury condo, but enough to make some serious plans. Phoebe must have sensed something was different because she started asking pointed questions. "You seem awfully confident lately," she said during our Christmas Eve dinner. "Did you get a promotion or something?" "Just doing well," I said vaguely. "Doing well how?" "You're still in that same tiny apartment, right?" "For now," I said. She studied my face, clearly frustrated by my non-answers. She was used to being able to tear me down, but I wasn't giving her any ammunition. "Well, don't get too big for your britches," she said finally. "We both know how your grand schemes usually turn out." But there was uncertainty in her voice now. She could sense that something had shifted, and she didn't like it. That night, I started seriously looking at real estate listings. Not just dreaming, but actually calculating what I could afford based on my current income and growth projections. The family gathering in January was particularly painful. Phoebe had just bought a new luxury car, a lease, I suspected, based on Vance's uncomfortable expression when she announced it. "Isn't she beautiful?" Phoebe gushed, showing everyone photos of the sleek black sedan. "Vance surprised me with her for our 6-month anniversary." The family oohed and awed appropriately. Dad took pictures, Mom hugged Phoebe, and even my usually reserved uncle seemed impressed. "You two are really living the dream," my aunt said admiringly. When the attention finally shifted away from Phoebe's new car, I mentioned that I'd been doing some consulting work on the side that was going well. "That's nice, honey," Mom said absently, already turning back to admire more photos of Phoebe's car. Dad nodded without really listening. The contrast was stark and painful. Phoebe's achievements, even when they were just expensive purchases, received celebration and praise. My actual business success was treated like background noise. I excused myself early that night, claiming I had work to catch up on. Which was true, but it was work I was excited about, work that was building towards something bigger than any of them could imagine. In my car, I made a decision. It was time to take the biggest risk of my life. The property I found was perfect. A 2-bedroom condo in a converted warehouse downtown, with exposed brick walls and huge windows overlooking the city. It needed some work, but the bones were solid. The asking price was aggressive, almost every penny I'd made from the app, plus a significant mortgage. If anything went wrong with the business, I'd be in serious trouble. But the location was incredible. The building was in an up-and-coming neighborhood that was attracting young professionals and artists. Similar units in the area were selling for twice what this one was listed for. The catch? The seller needed a cash offer and a quick close. No financing contingencies, no inspection period. It was all or nothing. I stared at the listing photos for hours, running the numbers over and over. This was my chance to prove everyone wrong, but it was also the biggest gamble I'd ever taken. My savings account balance stared back at me from my laptop screen. Enough for the down payment and some renovations, but barely. If the app business continued growing at its current rate, I'd be fine. But business was unpredictable. What if clients started canceling? What if a competitor emerged? What if I'd just been lucky so far? But then I heard Phoebe's voice in my head, "You'll always be small." I picked up my phone and called my real estate agent. The next 2 weeks were the most stressful of my life. The seller accepted my offer, but then everything that could go wrong started going wrong. 2 of my biggest clients delayed their contract renewals, citing budget concerns. A software bug caused problems for 3 other clients, requiring me to offer partial refunds. My bank account dwindled daily as I covered business expenses while waiting for the delayed payments. I had nightmares about losing everything: the business, the apartment, my savings. I stopped eating out entirely, surviving on rice and beans while every dollar went toward keeping the business afloat and saving for the property closing. There were moments when I seriously considered backing out of the deal. The safe choice would be to keep renting, keep building the business slowly, and maybe try again in a few years. But every time I wavered, I thought about that dinner conversation, about Phoebe's certainty that I'd never amount to anything. I worked 18-hour days, personally calling every potential client I could find. I fixed bugs, improved features, and provided customer service that went above and beyond anything my competitors offered. Slowly, things started turning around. The delayed contracts came through. New clients signed up. The bug fixes actually made the app better than it had been before. 3 days before the closing, I finally had enough money in my account. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning in February. I took the day off and arrived at the lawyer's office 30 minutes early, just to make sure everything was perfect. The paperwork seemed endless. Signatures, initials, more signatures. But finally, the lawyer slid a small set of keys across the table. "Congratulations," she said with a smile. "You're officially a homeowner." I held the keys in my palm, feeling their weight. Such small objects, but they represented everything I'd worked for over the past year. The seller met me at the property for the final walkthrough. As I unlocked the door for the first time as the owner, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The space was mine. Not just rented, not just borrowed, but actually mine. I didn't tell anyone about the purchase. Not yet. I wanted to surprise them, but more than that, I wanted to savor this moment privately. That night, I slept in my old apartment one last time. Tomorrow, I'd start moving into my new home. But tonight was for planning. I already knew exactly how I wanted to reveal this to my family. Particularly to Phoebe. It was time for her to learn that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who surprises you the biggest. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Phoebe decided to host a dinner party at her and Vance's apartment the following weekend. It's going to be there quietly. The dinner was everything I expected. Phoebe's apartment was undeniably beautiful, with modern furniture and carefully curated art on the walls. She'd clearly spent hours preparing the meal and setting the perfect table. But throughout the evening, she couldn't resist taking shots at me. "Matt's still in his cute little studio," she told the other guests. "He says he likes it, but I think he's just making the best of a bad situation. Some people are more comfortable with modest expectations," she added later, while describing her own career ambitions. During dessert, she delivered the coup de grace. "You know, Matt, you should really learn from what Vance and I have accomplished here," she said, gesturing around her beautiful dining room. "This is what success looks like. This is what happens when you refuse to settle for mediocrity." The other guests nodded politely, though I could see some of them looked uncomfortable with how directly she was attacking me. I just smiled and said, "You're absolutely right, Phoebe. Success is definitely something worth striving for." The next morning, I called my parents and Phoebe to invite them over to see something I'd been working on. "What kind of something?" Mom asked suspiciously. "Just a project I want to show you," I said. "Can you all come by next Saturday afternoon?" Phoebe immediately assumed I'd done some kind of renovation to my studio apartment. "Oh God," I heard her say to Vance in the background. "He probably painted an accent wall or something and thinks it's a big deal." "I heard about those tiny house shows," she said into the phone. "Are you going to show us how you've maximized your storage space?" I could practically hear her eye roll. "Just come over around 2, I said. "I think you'll be surprised." After I hung up, Phoebe called back. "Matt, I hope you're not expecting us to make a big fuss over whatever this is," she said. "I mean, it's sweet that you're trying to improve your space, but let's keep our expectations realistic." "Trust me," I said. "I think this will exceed your expectations." She laughed. "Okay, but don't be disappointed if we're not as impressed as you hope. You know how these things go." Actually, I did know how these things went. But this time was going to be different. Saturday arrived, and I could barely contain my excitement. I'd spent the morning doing final touch-ups on the new place, arranging furniture, hanging art, making sure everything looked perfect. At 1:45, I positioned myself near the building entrance to wait for my family. They arrived together, with Phoebe already shaking her head. "I still can't believe he's making such a big deal about this," she was saying to Mom as they approached. "It's probably just new curtains or something. Maybe he got some nice furniture," Mom said hopefully. "With what money?" Phoebe replied. "Let's just try to be supportive, even if it's disappointing." Vance looked uncomfortable with the conversation, but he didn't say anything. "Hi everyone," I said, greeting them on the sidewalk. "So where's this big surprise?" Phoebe asked, looking around. "Are we going up to your apartment or what?" "Actually," I said, "we need to walk a couple blocks." Phoebe's face immediately shifted to confusion and annoyance. "Walk where? I thought we were seeing your place." "We are," I said with a smile. "Just not the place you think." As we walked, I led them toward the upscale part of downtown. The neighborhood got nicer with each block, newer buildings, tree-lined streets, trendy cafes and boutiques. Phoebe's confusion was growing. "Matt, where exactly are we going?" she asked. "This isn't the way to your apartment." "I think we're lost," she whispered loudly to Vance. "He's probably gotten turned around." But I could see the recognition starting to dawn on Mom's face. She was looking at the neighborhood, then at me, then back at the buildings around us. "Matt," she said quietly, "what's going on?" We stopped in front of my building, a beautiful converted warehouse with large windows and a modern glass entrance. "This is it," I said, pulling the keys from my pocket. Phoebe stared at the building, then at the keys, then back at the building. "This is what?" she asked, but her voice had lost its confident edge. Dad was looking around the neighborhood with new eyes, noticing the expensive cars parked on the street and the upscale restaurants nearby. "Matt," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are these your keys?" I smiled and walked toward the entrance. "Let me show you my new home." The silence as I unlocked the door was deafening. I could hear Phoebe's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a small whimper. I pushed open the door and gestured for them to enter first. "Welcome to my place," I said. The space was everything I'd hoped it would be. Sunlight streamed through the huge windows, highlighting the exposed brick walls and gleaming hardwood floors. The kit layer had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The living room was spacious enough for a full dining set and a comfortable seating area. It was easily 3 times the size of my old studio apartment, and probably bigger than Phoebe's place too. Mom gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Dad whistled low under his breath. Vance's eyes went wide as he took in the high ceilings and architectural details. But Phoebe just stood frozen in the doorway, staring. "How?" she finally managed to say. "How is this possible?" "I bought it," I said simply. "It's mine." But you live in that tiny studio," she stammered. "You don't have money for something like this." "Actually, I do," I said. "Or I did. I spent most of my savings on the down payment, but the mortgage is totally manageable thanks to my business." "What business?" she practically shouted. For the first time, I told them everything. Instead of congratulating me, Phoebe immediately went on the attack. "This doesn't make sense," she said, pacing around my living room. "You're lying about something. Nobody goes from a studio apartment to this in a few months." "A year and a half," I corrected. "I've been working on this for a year and a half." "You're hiding something," she continued, her voice getting shrill. "Did you get some kind of inheritance? Did someone loan you money? Because there's no way you earned this legitimately." Mom and Dad were looking around the apartment with obvious pride and amazement, but Phoebe couldn't let herself accept what she was seeing. "Maybe you got lucky with some kind of investment scam," she said. But this isn't real success. Real success takes time and planning and education. Like a business degree? I asked innocently. Because I'm pretty sure I built a profitable company from scratch using skills I taught myself. Anyone can get lucky once, she snapped. Let's see how long you can actually keep this up. Vance, meanwhile, was examining the built-in bookshelves and asking me questions about the renovation details. He seemed genuinely impressed, which clearly annoyed Phoebe even more. This is just a phase, she said finally. You'll be back to reality soon enough. But her voice lacked its usual confidence. That's when Vance dropped the bombshell that changed everything. You know, Matt, he said, running his hand along the granite countertop, this place is incredible. I'm actually jealous. Phoebe whipped around to stare at him. Jealous? Why would you be jealous? We have a beautiful place too. Vance's face went red, and he looked like he immediately regretted speaking. I just meant. You know, the location is great, and Matt actually owns it outright instead of. He trailed off, realizing he was about to say something he shouldn't. Instead of what? Phoebe demanded. Vance glanced around at my parents and me, clearly wishing he could disappear. Instead of what, Vance? Phoebe's voice was getting dangerously quiet. Instead of having to worry about foreclosure, he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. The silence that followed was devastating. Mom gasped. Dad's eyebrows shot up. Phoebe's face went through about 5 different shades of red. We're not in foreclosure, she said quickly. We're just renegotiating some terms with the bank. But Vance was already shaking his head. Phoebe, they sent the final notice last week. We have 30 days. The perfect image finally cracked completely open. Suddenly, everything made sense. The stress I'd been noticing, the whispered phone calls, the way Vance had talked about the pressure of homeownership. Mom and Dad immediately shifted into problem-solving mode, asking what they could do to help. But I could see the shock in their eyes too. Their golden child, the success story they'd been celebrating, was about to lose everything. It's just a temporary setback, Phoebe said desperately. These things happen with real estate. It's not like Matt's little hobby business that anyone could luck into. But the fight had gone out of her voice. For the first time in our lives, I was the one with the stable situation, and she was the one struggling. We could probably help with a few thousand, Dad said quietly to Phoebe, but I don't think we have enough to cover a whole mortgage payment. We'll figure it out, Phoebe said, but she looked defeated. The family dynamic had shifted in the space of an afternoon. Suddenly, I was the responsible one, the success story, the son they could be proud of. Maybe Matt has some advice, Mom suggested tentatively. He's obviously good with money management. Phoebe shot me a look that could have melted steel. But for the first time, it didn't hurt. Her opinion of me didn't matter anymore because I knew who I really was. As they prepared to leave, I walked them to the door. Phoebe hung back while the others said their goodbyes. You know what's funny? I said to her quietly. She glared at me, waiting. You spent so much time mocking me for having small keys to a small place, I continued. But now I'm holding the keys you've been dreaming about. I dangled my house keys, letting them catch the light from the windows. These keys open doors to rooms bigger than my entire old apartment, I said. They represent actual ownership, not just borrowed time. They're the keys to a home I can afford, not one that's about to be taken away. Phoebe's eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. You think you're so smart, she whispered. But I know you. This won't last. You'll mess it up somehow. Maybe, I said with a shrug. But at least when I fail, it'll be because of my own choices, not because I was pretending to be something I couldn't afford. She started to respond, but Vance called her name from the hallway. The keys might look the same, I added as she turned to go, but what they unlock makes all the difference. After they left, I stood alone in my new home, looking out the huge windows at the city below. The late afternoon sun was painting everything golden, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Can't wait to see you again soon." Another from Dad, "That's quite an accomplishment, son. Well done." Even Vance sent a message, "Seriously impressive place. Hope we can get together under better circumstances next time." Nothing from Phoebe, but I hadn't expected anything. I walked through each room of my new home, running my hands along the walls, feeling the solid reality of what I'd built. Not just the apartment, but the business, the independence, the self-respect. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now.